There's something about Dolly Parton that feels almost mythical. That voice, honeyed and warm, capable of shattering hearts with a single note. Those platinum blonde wigs stacked impossibly high, shimmering under stage lights like crowns fit for a queen. And that laugh, God, that laugh. The kind that makes you feel like you're sitting on a front porch in Tennessee, sharing sweet tea and secrets with an old friend. For more than 60 years, she's been America's sweetheart. A woman who turned poverty into poetry, who climbed out of the Smoky Mountains with nothing but a guitar and a dream, and built an empire that spans music, film, theme parks, and philanthropy. She's written thousands of songs, starred in Hollywood blockbusters, and donated millions to causes close to her heart. To the world, Dolly Parton is untouchable, a beacon of kindness in an industry known for chewing people up and spitting them out. But here's what most people don't know. Behind that glittering facade, behind the rhinestones and the red lipstick and the carefully crafted image of Southern charm, there's a woman who has been hurt, betrayed, and disappointed more times than she'd ever publicly admit. Dolly doesn't do confrontation. She doesn't throw drinks in people's faces or unleash angry tirades on social media. She smiles, she forgives, at least publicly, and she moves on. But make no mistake, Dolly Parton remembers everything. Every slight, every betrayal, every person who underestimated her or tried to take what was rightfully hers. And while she may not have named names before, the truth has a way of surfacing, especially when you've lived as long and as fully as she has. This isn't a story about feuds or tabloid drama. This is something deeper, something more painful. This is about 5 people who left marks on Dolly Parton's heart, wounds that even decades of success couldn't quite heal. Some were legends she idolized. Others were partners she trusted. A few were critics who underestimated her. But all of them, in their own way, taught Dolly that even the kindest soul has limits, and that sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones you never expected. So let's pull back the curtain and step into the shadows of Dolly's story. The parts she rarely talks about, the moments that shaped her into the icon she is today. Because this isn't just about who wronged Dolly Parton. It's about how she survived them, how she turned pain into power, and how she learned that sometimes the greatest act of strength isn't fighting back. It's simply refusing to let them dim your light. The year was 1974, and Dolly Parton was standing at a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. She had just written a song, a delicate, aching ballad about letting go of someone you love, even when it tears your heart in two. The song was called I Will Always Love You, and it was born out of one of the most painful decisions she'd ever made, leaving her mentor and longtime performing partner, Porter Wagoner, to pursue a solo career. The song climbed the charts quickly, resonating with anyone who'd ever had to say goodbye. It was raw, honest, and deeply personal, the kind of song that only comes from real heartbreak. And then, one ordinary afternoon, Dolly's phone rang with news that made her heart stop. Elvis Presley wanted to record her song, Elvis, the King, the man whose voice had soundtracked her childhood, whose posters had hung on the walls of her tiny cabin in the mountains, whose music had made her believe that dreams could come true. For Dolly, this wasn't just a professional opportunity. It was validation, a sign from the universe that she had truly made it. She imagined Elvis's voice wrapping around her lyrics, imagined millions of people hearing her words, sung by the most famous man in the world. It felt like destiny. According to those close to the situation, Elvis had been going through his own personal hell at the time. His marriage to Priscilla was falling apart, the fairy tale crumbling under the weight of fame, infidelity, and irreconcilable differences. Friends said he'd been singing I Will Always Love You in private, letting the lyrics express emotions he couldn't put into words himself. On the day he and Priscilla officially separated, he sang it to her one last time. For Elvis, this song wasn't just another recording. It was a lifeline, a way to process grief that felt too heavy to carry alone. Dolly was thrilled, honored, and terrified all at once. But then came the phone call that changed everything. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager and the man who controlled every aspect of the King's career, reached out to Dolly's team with his standard offer. If Elvis was going to record the song, he would need to own half of the publishing rights. 50%, Not just of the initial recording, but of everything the song would ever earn forever. It was Parker's ironclad rule. Elvis didn't sing anything unless he had a piece of the pie, and not just any piece, half of it. To most people, that might have seemed like a small price to pay for the prestige of having Elvis Presley record your song. But to Dolly Parton, it was unthinkable. Publishing rights weren't just about money. They were about ownership, control, and respect. Dolly had spent years in the music industry being told what to sing, how to dress, who to perform with, and how to present herself. She'd been underestimated because of her appearance, dismissed because of her accent, and patronized because she was a woman in a male-dominated industry. Now, finally, she was building something of her own, a catalog of songs that belonged to her and only her. Giving away half of I Will Always Love You would mean giving away half of her soul, half of her independence, half of everything she'd worked so hard to achieve. And Dolly knew, deep in her gut, that this song was special. She couldn't let it go. When she told Colonel Parker no, he didn't take it well. He pushed back hard, warning her that turning down Elvis Presley was career suicide. He reminded her that Elvis's version would be heard by millions, that it would make her more money than she could imagine, that she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But Dolly held firm even as her hands shook and tears welled up in her eyes. She later said that she cried all night after that conversation, sobbing into her pillow, questioning whether she'd just thrown away the opportunity of a lifetime. She adored Elvis. She wanted him to sing her song more than almost anything. But she also knew that some things aren't for sale. No matter how high the price, Elvis never recorded I Will Always Love You, and though there was never a public confrontation, never an angry exchange or a burned bridge, Dolly felt the absence of what could have been like a phantom limb. She believed that Elvis had been hurt by her decision, that he'd taken it personally, even though it was never about him. It was about her survival, her autonomy, her refusal to be controlled. When Elvis died in 1977, Dolly was devastated. She sat alone in her home, played I Will Always Love You on repeat, and wept. She mourned not just for the king, but for the what-ifs, the alternate timeline where maybe things could have been different. But here's the twist that makes this story so bittersweet. In 1992, nearly 2 decades after she turned down Elvis, Whitney Houston recorded I Will Always Love You for the soundtrack of The Bodyguard. It became one of the best-selling singles in music history, a global phenomenon that earned Dolly tens of millions of dollars in royalties. Because she'd kept full ownership of the publishing rights, every time that song played on the radio, every time it was covered or sampled or used in a movie, Dolly got paid. That one decision, the one that broke her heart and made her cry for nights on end, turned out to be the smartest move of her career. But even with all that success, even with all that money, Dolly has never quite shaken the ghost of Elvis Presley. She still talks about him with a softness in her voice, a wistfulness that suggests she's never fully forgiven herself for saying no, even though it was the right thing to do. Long before Dolly Parton became a household name, before the movies and the theme parks and the international fame, she was just a girl from the mountains with a big voice and bigger dreams. And the man who gave her a chance, who saw something special in her when no one else did, was Porter Wagoner. In 1967, Porter was already a star, hosting a wildly popular television variety show that reached millions of viewers every week. When his singing partner Norma Jean left the show, Porter needed a replacement. He chose Dolly, a 21-year-old newcomer with a thick Tennessee accent and an unpolished edge that television audiences weren't used to. At first, they hated her. Fans of the show wrote angry letters, accusing her of trying to replace their beloved Norma Jean. Some even booed her during live performances. But Porter stood by her, insisting that she had star quality, that audiences just needed time to see what he saw. And he was right. Within a few years, Dolly and Porter became one of the most beloved duos in country music. Their chemistry was undeniable, their harmonies were flawless, and their stage presence was magnetic. They recorded hit after hit, toured the country together, and built a partnership that seemed unbreakable. Dolly was grateful, indebted even to Porter for giving her that platform, for believing in her when no one else did. But as time went on, that gratitude began to feel like a cage. Porter was old school. a man who believed in control and authority. He wanted to manage every aspect of Dolly's career, from the songs she recorded to the outfits she wore to the interviews she gave. And while his intentions may have been good, his grip was suffocating. Dolly was growing, evolving, finding her own voice, and Porter couldn't handle it. By 1973, the tension between them had reached a breaking point. Dolly wanted to go solo, to explore different musical styles, to write songs that reflected her own experiences rather than fitting into Porter's mold. But Porter didn't want to let her go. He saw her as his protege, his creation, and the thought of her succeeding without him was unbearable. They argued constantly, their once easy friendship now strained and heavy with resentment. Dolly had promised Porter she'd stay with the show for 5 years, but by the 7th year she felt like she was drowning. So she did what she always did when words failed her. She wrote a song. One afternoon she walked into Porter's office, sat down across from him and sang "I Will Always Love You" for the first time. It was her goodbye, her thank you, and her apology all wrapped into one bittersweet melody. Porter cried. He told her she could go, that he understood. But he didn't mean it. Not really. The years that followed were some of the darkest of Dolly's career. In 1979, 5 years after she'd left the show, Porter sued her for $3 million, claiming she owed him a share of her earnings and damages for breach of contract. Dolly was blindsided. She'd thought they'd parted as friends, that the song had been enough to heal the wounds between them. But Porter's lawsuit felt like a betrayal, a knife in the back from someone she'd trusted and loved. She later said, "It broke my heart. I thought he was my friend." The case was settled privately, with Dolly paying an undisclosed sum just to make the pain stop. But the damage was done. For years, they didn't speak. Dolly went on to become one of the biggest stars in the world, while Porter's career slowly faded into the background. And though she never spoke ill of him publicly, those close to Dolly knew that the lawsuit had changed her, hardened her in ways that success never could. It taught her that loyalty is a two-way street, that love doesn't always mean letting someone control you, and that sometimes the people who help you the most are also the ones who hurt you the deepest. But time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges. In 2002, Dolly inducted Porter Wagoner into the Country Music Hall of Fame, calling him "a part of my heart" in a speech that brought the audience to tears. When Porter was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2007, Dolly was one of the last people to visit him before he died. She held his hand, reminded him of all the good times, and told him she forgave him. After his death, she performed a private tribute concert at Dollywood, far away from cameras and reporters, just her and a small group of friends singing the songs they'd made famous together. She once said, "We loved each other. We fought each other, but we never stopped caring." It was the closest Dolly ever came to admitting that Porter Wagoner had broken her heart. By the late 1980s, Dolly Parton had conquered country music and was making inroads into pop and film. But one of her most cherished projects was a collaboration with 2 women she deeply admired, Linda Ronstadt and Emmylou Harris. Together they called themselves Trio, and their self-titled 1987 album was a masterpiece of harmony and emotion. The blend of their voices was pure magic, 3 distinct styles merging into something greater than the sum of its parts. The album went platinum, won a Grammy, and cemented their place in music history. Fans believed this was a partnership that would last forever, but behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Dolly, Linda, and Emmylou came from very different worlds, and their approaches to music couldn't have been more different. Dolly was instinctive, spontaneous, the kind of artist who could walk into a studio and nail a song in 1 or 2 takes. She trusted her gut, believed in capturing raw emotion, and didn't like to overthink things. Linda Ronstadt, on the other hand, was a perfectionist. She could spend hours, even days, on a single verse, adjusting every breath, every note, every inflection until it was flawless. To Dolly, that level of control sucked the joy out of music. To Linda, Dolly's casual approach felt careless, almost unprofessional. What started as creative differences slowly turned into something uglier, resentment simmering just beneath the surface. When plans for Trio 2 began in the early 1990s, the process was agonizing. Scheduling conflicts, label disputes, and creative disagreements dragged production out for years. Dolly's career was busier than ever. She was making movies, running Dollywood, recording solo albums, and constantly traveling. She'd cancel recording sessions or show up late, not out of disrespect, but because she was juggling 1,000 things at once. Linda, who valued structure and commitment, grew increasingly frustrated. The friendship that had once been effortless now felt like work, and not the good kind. Then came the betrayal that Dolly never saw coming. Tired of waiting, Linda took several of the unfinished Trio 2 songs, stripped Dolly's vocals from them, and released them on her own 1995 solo album, Feels Like Home. To outsiders, it might have seemed like a practical decision, just making use of material that was sitting around. But to Dolly, it was a slap in the face. Those songs weren't just tracks on a hard drive. They were memories, hours of laughter and late-night harmonies, pieces of a friendship she'd believed in. Hearing them released without her voice felt like being erased, like her contributions didn't matter. True to form, Dolly didn't lash out. She didn't give angry interviews or write cryptic social media posts. She simply went quiet, letting her silence speak volumes. But those close to her knew she was devastated. Dolly valued loyalty above almost everything else, and losing that, in a project she'd considered sacred, left a scar that never fully healed. When Trio 2 was finally released in 1999, the music was still beautiful, the harmonies still breathtaking. But the warmth between Dolly and Linda was gone, replaced by polite professionalism and carefully chosen words. Years later, when Linda was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and had to retire from singing, Dolly spoke about her with nothing but grace and compassion. "She has one of the most beautiful voices in the world," Dolly said in an interview, her voice soft and genuine. Linda, too, acknowledged that working with Dolly had been a blessing, but their bond never fully recovered. They'd created something extraordinary together and lost something just as precious in the process. As Dolly once reflected, "Some people you love from a distance." With Linda Ronstadt, that distance was filled with admiration, but also with a quiet, lingering heartbreak. By 2008, Dolly Parton had weathered decades of highs and lows, triumphs and betrayals. She'd built a career on authenticity, on being the real deal in an industry full of smoke and mirrors. But nothing could have prepared her for the humiliation that came courtesy of radio shock jock Howard Stern. Known for his crude humor and boundary-pushing antics, Stern had made a career out of saying the unsayable. But what he did to Dolly crossed every line imaginable. That year, Stern's show aired a segment using clips from Dolly's audiobook, My Life and Other Unfinished Business. His production team took her voice, her actual recorded words, and manipulated them, splicing and editing until it sounded like Dolly was saying vile, racist, and sexually explicit things. It was presented as comedy, as satire, but there was nothing funny about it. To millions of people who loved Dolly for her kindness, her integrity, and her wholesome image, it felt like a character assassination. When Dolly heard about it, she was shattered. For a woman who rarely showed anger, who prided herself on rising above negativity, this was too much. She released a statement that was uncharacteristically emotional, saying she had never been so shocked, hurt, and humiliated in her entire life. "In a blue million years," she said, "I would never have such vulgar things come out of my mouth." She even hinted at the possibility of legal action, something she almost never did. Howard Stern refused to apologize. He dismissed the outrage as oversensitivity, claiming it was just a joke and that people needed to lighten up. But the damage was done. Fans were furious, and for years Dolly wouldn't even speak his name. Then in 2023, something unexpected happened. While promoting her rock album, Rockstar, Dolly agreed to appear on Stern's show. The conversation was civil, even friendly, but there was an undercurrent of tension, a weight in the air that neither of them fully addressed. She had forgiven, perhaps, but not forgotten. It was classic Dolly, extending grace without surrendering her dignity, showing kindness without letting herself be walked over again. And finally, there was Jeff Tweedy, the frontman of the indie rock band Wilco. By the time Tweedy made his comments about Dolly, She was already a living legend, a woman whose songs had transcended genre, generation, and geography. But not everyone saw her that way. In an interview, Tweedy criticized Dolly's songwriting, dismissing her work as catchy but shallow, lacking the depth and poetry of more serious artists. He even suggested she should have stopped writing after Jolene, as if her entire catalog could be reduced to one song. For Dolly, who had written more than 3,000 songs, many of them drawn from her own life, her family's struggles, and her deepest emotions, the criticism stung. She'd never needed to defend her work before. Her success spoke for itself. But the comment stayed with her, another reminder that no matter how much you achieve, there will always be someone ready to tear you down. Dolly didn't respond publicly. She never does. But her songs had already answered for her. I Will Always Love You became one of the best-selling singles in history. Coat of Many Colors was preserved in the Library of Congress for its cultural significance. And Jolene, the very song Tweedy referenced, had been covered by hundreds of artists and remained one of the most iconic tracks in music history. She once said, "People think if you look artificial, you can't be real. But everything about me is real. My heart, my music, my work." In the end, Dolly Parton's story isn't about the 5 people who hurt her. It's about what she did with that pain. Elvis Presley, Porter Wagoner, Linda Ronstadt, Howard Stern, Jeff Tweedy, 5 names, 5 wounds, 5 lessons that shaped the woman behind the legend. She never shouted back, never sought revenge, never let bitterness consume her. Instead, she turned every heartbreak into a hit song, every insult into fuel for her success, every betrayal into a reminder of her own strength. For more than 6 decades, Dolly Parton has shown the world that grace doesn't mean weakness, that kindness doesn't mean naivety, and that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. She's proven that you can be soft and strong, glamorous and grounded, hurt and healed all at the same time. At 79 years old, she remains a living testament to the power of resilience, a woman who turned every obstacle into an opportunity, every enemy into a chapter in her story. And perhaps most importantly, she's shown that the best revenge isn't anger or bitterness. It's success, it's longevity, and it's refusing to let anyone dim your light. Because in the end, the people who doubted Dolly Parton didn't break her. They made her legendary.